Hi, welcome to my channel. This is Bret in Italy. I am Bret, and we are in Italy. You can see behind me the church of Padre Pio, St. Padre Pio. I am in San Giovanni Rotondo. You can see the ancient church behind me to my right, and the newer church back behind me to my left. So if you follow me at all, you know I'm a big fan of Padre Pio, that I had a number of experiences with Padre Pio, and he's just I consider him sort of a protector saint in my life. Now, I know a lot of you probably watching maybe have a similar devotion to Padre Pio, or maybe you don't. There was a period of time which I didn't, because I didn't understand who Padre Pio was. More importantly, he hadn't done anything directly in my life. And honestly, the first time I came here, which was 2001, I believe, I did a tour through the church behind me, which we're going to go just a few moments. I'll take you through. We'll do the same thing I did years ago. And I found some of this kind of devotion a little over the top, maybe a little fanatic. I didn't understand this intense devotion to Padre Pio. But after I had several experiences with Padre Pio, which I'll talk about at the end of this recording, then it's not that I understood, it's just he became that powerful protector for me, because he had touched me in a very personal way. And I had 3 experiences with Padre Pio, which again I'll talk about at the end of this recording. But first I want to tell you a little bit about who Padre Pio was and who he is. He was born in 1887, I believe in May, I forget the day, Pietrelcina, province of Benevento. And from the time he was a boy, a child, he was very devout. He just had a special gift of purity. So from the time he was his early childhood, he was just very prayerful. He had very special graces in that he had a prayer life, a charismatic prayer life, where he could pray to not the saints, Mary, angels, but he could actually see them. They would talk to him. He could hear them. So he was so pure. He was already in this sort of otherworldly experience, even from the time of his childhood. Then he grew up a little bit older. He was 5 years old when he received the calling to the priesthood. He was in a church called Sant'Anna, which I hope to go to Pietrelcina and do some video shooting there, because there's a lot of really special places in Pietrelcina. But he was a little church, tiny little church of Sant'Anna, and he had a vision of Christ. He was in prayer. Christ appeared in a vision, walked over to him, and he placed his hand on Padre Pio's head. It wasn't Padre Pio. He was Francesco Forgione, was his birth name. Francesco, after St. Francis of Assisi. His father, Forgione, was his last name, Grazio Forgione. Placed his hand on Padre Pio's head, and that was it. Padre Pio understood that he was called to be a priest. What kind of priest he would become was revealed in time. When he was a little older, he was an adolescent, and he was out in the farmland outside of Pietrelcina, a place called Piana Romana. His parents owned a little plot of land. They would grow agricultural goods, whatever, and sell it. That's how they made a living. And a Capuchin friar was walking through, and he had a long beard. The Capuchins have the long beards. They wear the gray habit, gray tunic, and have long beards. So this friar came walking through. He was doing what's called the questua. That is, he was asking for food, asking for goods, and they would just kind of go town to town, village to village, and they would have baskets and just collect stuff and then go back home. Fra Camillo was his name. Fra Camillo da Santa Lia Pianisi, I think, was the town he was from. Padre Pio saw him. He loved his beard, and he said, I want to be that kind of priest. I want to be a Capuchin priest with a long beard. His parents weren't in favor of it, because it was a very harsh life in those times. They practiced penance. They practiced, they're very ascetic, lots of fasting. The convents where they lived were in kind of cold hillside areas. They were very cold in the winter. Padre Pio, Francesco, from the time of his childhood, already had health ailments. He was never in great health. But he went in, when he was 15 years old, he went to Morcone, which we'll see some pictures of these, some of these convents that he lived in throughout his formation. And went to Morcone, did a year of novitiate. He wasn't really, he didn't stand out. Like later when he became Padre Pio and all these mystical things started happening, people started asking his novice brothers, what was he like? And they didn't really remember him because he was so quiet. He was kind of like a wallflower. He did that for a year. He was assigned his name, Pio, after one of the St. Piuses. I forget which one. I think it was one of the early Piuses. And he made his first vows, received the habit. Then he was sent to a place called Santa Lia Pianisi to begin his formation for philosophy. That's when the mystical things started happening. He was 15, now he's 16. 2 things happened. One, he was in the choir praying, and he was transported into a noble palace in northern Italy at Udine. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we go in through the corridor, because there's some pictures of the places where he lived. As well as there was a demonic moment where he was in his cell and all of a sudden he started smelling this sulfuric stench of a smell, and the temperature dropped and it got cold. Then a black dog, growling dog, vicious dog, jumped into his cell, through his door, growled at him, and he heard a voice saying, "Eisto, eisto." It's kind of a dialect Italian way of saying it. Lui, it's him, it's him. It was the devil. And then it jumped up through the window and disappeared. So Padre Pio, Fra Pio, he was still a brother at this point, had these kinds of experiences, even in childhood, where he would have these appearances with devils. They would attack him, harass him. I think they call it vexation or oppression or something. He was never possessed, but he did have these disturbances by evil spirits. God allowed it, and God allows these sorts of things for our growth, that we will turn to God, that we will be dependent on God, for perseverance. For different reasons, God allows these sorts of irritations. And in his case, they were a little bit more than irritations, because there were times where he was actually physically assaulted by demons. They would leave marks on his body. But also, he was always consoled by angels. So God never leaves us in the darkness. He always illumines us with his graces, with his consolation. And so Padre Pio also experienced great ecstasies and great consolations, and they always followed these dark attacks. So God is always very good, even if he allows difficult things to happen. When we turn to him, he always gives us the gifts, and he always gives us what we need. He never, this is scriptural, he never allows difficulties to happen to us that are more than we can bear. There's always a limit. He will always intervene no matter what we're going through. He will always intervene when we need it, and when he knows we need it, if we turn to him, when we turn to him. So Padre Pio had this experience of the bilocation, the dog, and also the third thing that happened, he started getting sick. And he so he went, and he was sorry, there's a woman here, she's asking for something. I don't have any money. I would give it to her if I had it, but I just don't have it. So Padre Pio, the third thing that happened, he started to get sick, and he had gone out with the friars. They went on an excursion to meet the observant friars, the OFM friars, and have some kind of prayer meeting together. And it was raining. He came home and he got really sick, and he started having these lung ailments. And now the only time he was able to recover, when he was a young man, a young friar in formation, is when he went home to Pietrelcina. So he was sent home because when he was in the convent, his health was too bad. But when he went home, mysteriously his ailments would get better. So he would go home, he would get better, back to his mother's house. He stayed with his brother a little bit. There was this kind of a tower place. Again, I hope to go to Pietrelcina, show you these places. And when he was home, with his home air, something about being home, he got better. And then he would recover, and then he would come back into the convent, restart his formation, come back to community, and he would get instantly sick. Then he would go back home. So this went back and forth for years, I think around 10 years. And he was granted a special dispensation from having to live in the community with the friars, and he was continuing his formation. He studied for priesthood and was ordained in Benevento, celebrated his first Mass at the church in Pietrelcina. Now, around the time of his ordination, which was in 1910, a couple things happened. First, he was ordained a priest. Second, when he was ordained a priest, he wrote on the prayer cards that he distributed to the people who attended his first Mass that he offered himself as a victim for his people. He quoted, I think it was Ruth. It was an Old Testament scripture of offering himself as a sacrifice for his people. So he's kind of offering himself as a victim soul, that he would be sacrificed so that others would live. Shortly after that, he received the stigmata the first time. He was praying in the field out in Piana Romana, where he would go, where his parents owned the land, and he was pierced by the Christ's nails in his hands, feet, and side. And he went back into town. It's about a 45 minute walk or so, maybe 2 miles. Went to the parish priest. They prayed that the wounds would be removed. They were removed physically, but the pains remained. So they were considered invisible stigmata at that point. So after a period of time went by, he still went back and forth in the order, out of the order. His illness, he would get better when he would go home. He would get worse when he would go into the convent. Finally, the provincial minister was kind of at wit's end. He said, listen, you're going to have to leave the order. You're a priest. You can be a priest in a diocese or something. You're going to have to leave the Capuchin order if you don't come back in. So he arranged it so he would go to Foggia, which is down here. Well, actually, you can kind of see. You can see the plains down there. You can see the water, the sea over here. City of Manfredonia. Inside is Foggia. So he was assigned to, he went, almost he was kind of tricked back in the order. There was a noblewoman who was a third order tertiary who had cancer and she was dying, and she had a corresponding relationship with Padre Pio via letters. She asked the provincial minister if he would send Padre Pio to her so that she could confess to him in person. So he did. Padre Pio went there thinking it was just going to be a visit for a few days and he was going to go back home. The provincial minister met him at the train station. He said, "Give me your return ticket, give me any money you have, you're going to stay here. If you die in the convent, you die in the convent. If you go back home, you're staying home." Gave him the ultimatum. So Padre Pio stayed. He was obedient, but he just was scared because every time he would go into the convent, he would get sick, and would go home and he would get better. So he heard this woman's confession. He was there every day, ministered to her. She died shortly thereafter. Now, about this time, Foggia's 30 kilometers from here, 20 miles, one of the friars from the community behind me was preaching a mission down, I believe it was for Lent. It must have been 1916, preaching Lent. He met Padre Pio, said, "Why don't you come up to our Capuchin hermitage up here in San Giovanni Rotondo? The mountain air might be good for your lungs," because he continued to have these lung ailments. He came up here. None of this was here around me. All this busy hustle bustle. None of this was here. Very quiet. You had the church here, the convent. The larger church was not here. None of it was here. Basically, it looked like, see the mountainside up there? It pretty much looked like that all around here. Very quiet. So he said, "Come up quiet. The solitude will do you well, probably." And he did. Padre Pio came to, it was 1916. He said he wanted to stay. He made the request. He left a few more times, and in 1918, he got a permanent assignment up here. And he got here, I believe it was May. And when he arrived, several things happened. The first is, shortly after he arrived, he was in confession. He was hearing the confession of the students. This was the student house of the young friars becoming in the formation. Was hearing one of their confessions, and he saw sort of a celestial figure with a dart or an arrow. He threw it at him, and it pierced his heart. It's called transverberation. And then after that, he several months after that, on September 20th, 1918, he received the stigmata. And we'll go in there. I'll tell you a little more about that when we go in, and I'll show you the choir where it took place. But Padre Pio was already known as a very holy priest, even though he hadn't had these outward signs yet. People would confess to him. They would hear him preach. They would have corresponding relationships with him. He was always already directing people's souls, leading them towards God, helping them convert, helping them become holy. And he had a number of spiritual sons and daughters, particular spiritual daughters, young faithful women who come to Mass every day, and they put them under his spiritual direction. One of them was up here the day after he received the stigmata. She saw his wounds. He tried to cover them up. She said, "What's on your hand? What happened to your hands?" He tried to dodge the question. She saw a wound. She knew what had happened. So she went home, told her sisters. He was a spiritual daughter, Padre Pio, and her mother. Word spread like wildfire. Townspeople started coming up. "Padre Pio, he's a saint. He's got the stigmata." All these people started coming here. And then word spread in the area. People started coming up. And then the authorities got involved, the religious authorities. Within a short period of time, Rome heard about it. They sent people, doctors to look at it. They said, "You need to test this. Is it real? Is it not?" So there's a lot of story about this, a lot of history. There were some jealousies there, including one of his own spiritual daughters. She was jealous of Padre Pio's favorite spiritual daughter. He called her his prediletta, his favored one. Cleonice was her name. This other spiritual daughter was jealous. So she went to the bishop in Manfredonia and told the bishop she saw Padre Pio and Cleonice kissing. And then all the accusations came. So at that point, he was suppressed for 2 years. The suppression was lifted. It was lifted by the Pope himself. The Pope said, "I've not been badly disposed to Padre Pio, I've been badly informed," and he lifted the suppressions. So Padre Pio continued to direct spiritual sons and daughters. He celebrated Mass every day, never preached. He celebrated a very holy Mass, very mystical Mass. People would come, very long Masses. He would hear confessions. That was his main ministry up here, was listening to confessions. He had the gift of reading people's souls. He had these charismatic, powerful interventions of the Holy Spirit where he would just tell him about his penitent in front of them. So he could see sins they had committed if they forgot to tell him, if they didn't want to tell him. He could be harsh in the confessional because he only had about 5 or 6 minutes per person. There was always long lines. You would have to schedule a confession. You would call up here, the a friary or send a letter, and they would give you a date. Come here. It's September. Come here. I don't know, December 9th, your day. Show up, and you wait in line. So if people came in, kind of putting him to the test, often people would just go to him like he's a circus act, like a carnival thing, and he would kick him out. He would say, "Go. You're not here for the right reason." Or if people were not contrite, that's according to canon law, a penitent has to be contrite for their sins. If they didn't care, didn't want to convert, amend their ways, he would kick them out. Often they would come back very contrite to get kicked out of the confessional by Padre Pio, put the fear of God in you. They would come back, and many people in these situations would become very devout spiritual sons and daughters. So that was his main ministry, was the confessional, and also corresponding with the laity, people of all ranks, poor, rich, wealthy, noble, people of culture, and so forth. The other thing, though, he's very concerned not just about the souls, but about the bodies. And I already showed you the church, which is just right over here. The church. People would come to him. He would pray for miracles, but miracles and prayers only go so far. God allows them, but he also wants us to use people who are specialized in this. So doctors came and initially started a little clinic down in the town of San Giovanni Rotondo. It didn't work out. So then he had this idea. He said, why don't we build a church up here on the mountainside, a hospital up here on the mountainside? And it didn't make any sense because, number one, to break rock and put the foundation would have taken an enormous feat. And this was a poor area back then. So, how are they going to get the money? How are they going to break ground? How are you going to put a hospital up here in the hill? There weren't any good roads getting up here also. Now there are, but back then there wasn't. Made no sense. But he felt convicted that the hospital had to be near the church. The two had to come together. When you're sick physically, you have a spiritual component. And he knew that he wanted the two to go together. Faith and medicine to come together. So we wanted patients to come here, number one, to be spiritually accompanied by nuns. So we make sure nuns were there in the hospital, staffed to visit and pray with the sick. But also they could be close to the sanctuary, and their loved ones bringing them here could be consoled and pray through the sanctuary. So for Padre Pio, physical health, spiritual health was the same. Even in the Latin word salus means two things. It means health and it means salvation in Latin. In Greek too. I forget the word in Greek, but the Greek word for salvation and health is the same. So Padre Pio understood that. He intuited that health and spirituality go together. And so here you have this great religious complex here, and then we have this great hospital complex here. So you really have like faith and reason really married here in a very special way. So Padre Pio was a man of the Middle Ages in many ways. A lot of his mystical things that happen, you think, what is this, a hagiographical legend from the Middle Ages? No, this is a man from the 1960s, the 20th century. He was a very modern man. He encouraged medicine. He encouraged people to go to the experts of the body, but at the same time to go for the soul. And the two are not separate, because Christ is Lord of our souls and he's Lord of our bodies. Okay, so he can heal, and he did heal. In the New Testament, people would touch his cloak. The hemorrhaging woman would touch his cloak and be healed. He would touch people's eyes. Sometimes he had to fast a little bit more. It's like sometimes this one's a little difficult. The man blind, he had to spit, and a couple times to get to heal him. So healings do happen through Christ alone, but they also happen in an ordinary way through doctors. So that's what Padre Pio shows us here. It's a very special place. We're going to go in now and walk through the complex. I'll show you some things on the inside, and we'll come back up and wrap up, and I'll tell you a little bit about my story and history with Padre Pio. All right, so this is the entrance into the church, the old church, the ancient church. This goes back to the 1500s. 1540 is when construction was begun on this. And it's a beautiful church, very simple, and all the Capuchin churches in this area look very similar to this. So there's the main altar, and over here is the image of Our Lady of Sorrows, Our Lady of Graces actually, and you'll see that reproduced in various places around here. So this is where Padre Pio confessed the women, the women's confessionals here. Okay, now it's behind these plexiglass protectors, and there's the main altar. Padre Pio would celebrate Mass initially here, and then later he would celebrate on the side altar. It's the altar of St. Francis, and he would celebrate right here on this main altar. There's a statue of St. Francis up here. Again, the Capuchin order is a Franciscan order, Franciscan Reform movement from 1528, I believe. And here's an ancient Roman martyr from this area back in antiquity. And Padre Pio also would celebrate on this altar as well. And I have to admit, I don't know who this altar is dedicated to. In the olden days, they would have relics inside the altar, relics of saints, but they've taken those away, mainly because it's hard to get relics now, hard to keep them. Okay, so this is the ancient church, and then there's an entrance in here to the newer church, which was built, I believe in the 1950s. I don't know the exact date, but this larger church was built to accommodate the crowds because there was too many people coming to Padre Pio's Mass. And they needed more space. So the last 10 or so years, Padre Pio celebrated here on the main altar. And they recreated with mosaics, they recreated the, see if I can zoom in here, recreated the same image of Our Lady with the Christ child there above it, the altar. And there's Padre Pio. After he was canonized, they put him in the scene as well. So much larger church. For a period of time also, they had special permission to celebrate outside in the space in front of the church. So let's walk back outside. So you can see what it's like going back out. So for a period of time, it's bright out here because it's in the morning. So for a period of time, the Padre Pio would celebrate here in front of the ancient church, which is up here behind me. I should put it back here, so I'll back out a little bit more. So up here, he would celebrate here. Got the ancient church, and then the newer church, and then the space here. Okay, so here's the hospital. You can see how large the hospital complex is there. And then you can see on down towards San Giovanni Rotondo, which is down there, really at the end of the street. It's kind of hard to see, but it's down there. We're down in the crypt now, so we're down below the larger church, St. Mary of Graces, Our Lady of Graces. And this is an important place because this is where Padre Pio was initially entombed. Try and turn the brightness up a little bit. So when he died in 1968, he was buried down here, and this space right here. So you can still see the area where he was entombed. But in 2008, they exhumed his body, and then they brought it over to the new church that they started building after his canonization. And his body is there most of the year, although they do bring it here during the winter months because it's warmer in here, and the large church over there is so spacious. There's so much volume of air, it's hard to heat. So they bring his body here several months a year. Let's come over from this side. So now there's a sort of a corridor here that begins, and it tells the story of his life a little bit. So I will do my best to come through here, and I'll probably put it on pause as I continue to make the corridor through here. This is an interesting little area. There's some photographs of all 10 sites where Padre Pio lived. And I went to all of those 10 sites, and I wrote about them in my one of my books on the convents of Padre Pio. So this is, where it is, Morcone. Here it is. This one up here is Morcone. That's where Padre Pio, as Francesco Forgione, did his novitiate. He spent 1 year at this church here. It's about 30 kilometers or so from Pietrelcina. And then from there, he went to Santa Lia Pianesi. And after he made his first vows, got a habit, got a new name, Pio. His name was Francesco Forgione. And then he came here, and he did his, started his philosophy. And about midway through, they moved him to another place. I believe it was down here, San Marco in Catola. I'm trying to move this down here. San Marco, he was there for a period of time. And then also he was here. Serra Capriola is there for a little bit of time. But probably the two most important places, I think, where Padre Pio was after Pietrelcina and after San Giovanni Rotondo is here and here. So here's where he made his novitiate. He got his name, got his habit, made his first vows. But this is interesting because he was scheduled to be here for 3 years for philosophy. And I'll tell the story a little bit as I walk down the hall. But he had his first two spiritual experiences. And by the way, here's a few other places where he stayed. He was in these places just for a short period of time while he was studying in his formation. The names are Montefusco, Gesualdo, and Campobasso. And all these places are in my book, The Convents of Padre Pio. But while he was starting his philosophy, two important spiritual events happened. One is he had his first bilocation, and another one, he started being attacked by demonic figures, including a big black dog who jumped up in his cell when he was studying. So he was only 16 years old, and it was very frightening. I'll tell you about his bilocation in a little bit. But these are some other places where he was. Actually, here's San Giovanni Rotondo. This is what San Giovanni Rotondo looked like 100 years ago, over 100 years ago when Padre Pio came. You can see the ancient church here. Here's what it looks like now, outside, we already saw. And here's the ancient church right here. So you can see the door right here. And up here you can see the same door here, okay? So they cut half of the church off about here, and this area over here, which is part of the convent, was torn down to build the new church, the modern church, which is this one here. So yeah, the first bilocation took place when Padre Pio was studying philosophy, and he was up in the choir praying, and all of a sudden he felt himself transported to a noblewoman's house in northern Italy. The noblewoman was giving birth in one room while her husband was dying in another room. So these are Padre Pio's parents, Grazio Forgione and Maria Giuseppe Denunzio. And these are pictures of Pietrelcina. So while this woman was dying, the husband was dying, a girl was being born. And Mary appeared to Padre Pio. And she said, "You're going to take this girl into your spiritual protection. You'll be her spiritual father." And he said, "Well, how can this be?" He was 16 years old. He said, "How can this be?" Let me turn this around. So Padre Pio said, "Well, how can this be? I'm not a priest. I hope to be a priest, but I'm not a priest." Mary said, "Don't worry about that. This will be provided." He did become a priest. And later, when the girl grew up, he met her in bilocation in a confessional in St. Peter's. She confessed. And then she later came to San Giovanni Rotondo. Padre Pio said, "I know you. I was there when you were born. Your father was dying in one room while your mother was giving birth to you in another room." And she ended up moving to San Giovanni Rotondo. She thought about becoming a nun. He said, "No, it should be a tertiary, be a third order Franciscan." But he became her spiritual father. And that's what I wanted to point out, that when God does these miraculous, supernatural signs and wonders, he does it for a good reason. In this case, the girl lost her father. Her father died the day she was born, but God provided her with a spiritual father who was Padre Pio. So God looks after us. So all these signs and wonders are evangelical. They have something good with them. There's always something good for our soul, or good for our bodies, good for our being. And so God's always looking after us. So all these signs and wonders we're talking about here, they're evangelical. They have a meaning. There's something good with them. This is not a circus act or a carnival act. And people did hear about Padre Pio, and for curiosity, they would come here just to sort of see all these, carnival-like things taking place. But if they come from God, they're for good. They're because of love and charity and goodness and beauty. And so that's why they really happen. So I'm going to put this on pause. I'm going to go up, and there's a corridor upstairs, and it'll take us down through the room where Padre Pio was when he died, the cell, as well as we'll go above the back of the ancient church. There's a crucifix in the chorus of the choir where Padre Pio received the stigmata the second time when he was here in 1918. So I'm up 2 flights of stairs, a little bit winded coming up there, but this is a important room here, and there are a number of important relics and some artifacts. These are the vestments and missals, the liturgical vessels that were used at Padre Pio's last Mass, that he used in his last Mass, which was 1968, September 22nd. He died on the 23rd at 2 o'clock in the morning. So the Mass, the altar linens, missals, prayers are all kept as they were, and they're on display here. This is really something too. These are letters written to Padre Pio from 1 year alone. I think like between May 1965 through June 1966. So you can see here there are hundreds or thousands, if not tens of thousands of letters. So the friars had groups of people who actually went through all the mail. They didn't throw it away, they read it, they looked at it, what was important, they tried to communicate to Padre Pio, and so forth. So here you have a lot of other artifacts as well. And here's some more mantle, I think you call that, a priestly vestment used for adoration, and it was worn by Padre Pio. And so I'm going to put this on pause, and we're going to go into a corridor showing some photographs of Padre Pio. All right, this is a photograph that was taken shortly after Padre Pio received the stigmata, and this was in, I believe, 1918 or 1919. He did so under holy obedience, but you can see the wounds, what they look like. They're about the size of a, I don't know, $quarter, maybe a little larger than a nickel or so forth. They changed as he grew and got older. You can see here he's a young man, so he's in his late 20s, 29 or so. But later, there's a photograph here of one of his last masses, and you can see how the wounds are now different. See this here? They're much bigger, crustier, if you will. Sorry for the vulgar image. But they were much larger and took up most of his palms of his hands. So he had wounds on his hands, his feet, his side. He had wounds on his shoulder, which they actually just discovered several years ago because they discovered a vestment that he had worn and it was bloodied on his right shoulder. And they believe that's from the carrying of the cross, the wound of carrying the cross. So here you have more pictures of what the wounds, the stigmata, looked like later in his life. And then through this corridor, there are more photographs of Padre Pio celebrating Mass here. Again, everything that Padre Pio did was in love. He used to say he had great love for people. Of course, great love for God, but he also had great love for people, which the hospital outside is a great testament to that. So this is a very important place because this is the cell where he was when he died. And before I do that, let me turn this around because I want to show you just something to try and get the orientation of this place. This corridor here we just came out of was added later, so you can see how the modern woodwork and so forth, and it was added. So this is the ancient convent, the convento. Okay, now we're back in the convent from the 1500s. This is cell number 1. Padre Pio was assigned here about halfway through his 50 years. So he's here for about 25 years. I don't know the exact dates, but he was given this room because he was always very sick and he had lung problems and he had trouble breathing. So you can see this room is much bigger. This was used for the students. So the students had a bed and then they would have desks in here. So the students' rooms were actually larger than the friars, the permanent friars. But this is, and it was larger, more spacious, and it had more volume of air so he could breathe better. Plus it also has 2 windows, which you can see here on the right, here and then back there. So he could open the windows and get more air and feel better. But most importantly, this is where he died, okay? And they left the room exactly the way it was the day he died, the morning he died on September 23rd, 1968. So you can see the oxygen tank over here. There's a chair here, a desk, and they've got it covered up. You've got some medical devices in here, cards, prayer cards, and so forth. All the icons on the wall up there. It's touching here. There's a picture of his parents, his mother and father there. So this is exactly what his room looked like the day he died. And he didn't sleep much. He would, kind of an insomniac. He would sleep a little bit, then he would get up and he would sit in the chair. He would pray the rosary. Then he would walk out here and shuffle around. There's a, I'm trying to switch this around. There's a testimony written by the friar who was accompanying him the night he died. We call it the Transitus of Padre Pio, so it describes in detail how it went. But you can see it, just look up the Transitus of Padre Pio, and you can get a sort of a detailed account of what it was like the night he died. So let's go down the corridor here around, and we're going to go through a couple rooms here that just kind of show a little bit about what life was like here back in the 1940s and 50s. These are some of the spiritual sons and daughters. These are actually the sons, the men here on this hallway, and just gives a little brief description of these people. He followed all kinds of people, poor people, uneducated people, all the way up to politicians, important people of culture, television, cinema, radio, the artistic world. A lot of people went to Padre Pio. Now this is the clausura, it's the cloister, so going down there is the closed part, it's closed to the public, but down here you had cell number 5, so cell number 5 is where Padre Pio lived for the first probably 25 years that he was in here, and then this is where he lived the last 25. So this part's open to the public, that place is closed. So here you have a place where, I believe this is where Padre Pio was operated on, and there was he had a hernia, and he was operated. Actually, it's another room, but I'll just tell the story now. But he was operated on for a hernia, and he didn't want the doctor looking at his wounds. He would wear gloves, and so he did not take any anesthesia, and he was operated on with no anesthesia, no general anesthesia, because he was so protective of his stigmata. Very sensitive about that. And these are some sitting rooms, so Padre Pio would greet people. People would come in here, and he would sit with them and counsel and listen to him. Here's one up here. It's kind of sweet. There's a little boy there. Padre Pio sitting on this chair down here, and there's a little boy up there. He's just talking to him, praying with. Here he's praying the rosary, praying here as well. So he would greet people up here. The men could come back up here into the convent. The women he would greet in the church and speak to in the church. These are some rocks that they used when they cleared out the space for the hospital. They just collected some of them and kind of gathered them up here. Some medical devices and some shoes and other vestments. Here's some books that the friars used. This was their student house. So it's all in Latin, but this is mostly Latin. But these are their books that they use for studying. More relics and more books here. So we're going to go into a place now that's probably one of the most important places. It's turn this around here. It's the choir above the ancient church where Padre Pio was when he received the stigmata. So I'm going to put this on pause. We'll walk up some steps, and we'll go into the ancient choir where the stigmata took place. Okay, so now we're going into the ancient church again, and I'll just turn it around first and show you the church, at least from the top part. There's the main altar down there, some frescoes here. So these are all just the way they were when Padre Pio was here, and the way it was when the friars were here for many centuries. There's St. Veronica Giuliani. She was a Capuchin female saint, and she received the stigmata also. But this is where Padre Pio was. That day was September 20th, 1918, and he was praying in front of this crucifix up here. We kind of pan up a little bit. He was praying in front of this crucifix, and he was seated down here, I believe, over in this corner over here. And it was, turn this around. It was September 20th, 1918. He was praying, and he saw sort of rays kind of come out of the wounds of Christ, pierced his hands, feet, and side. It was very physically painful. And he, this corridor right here, this is the exit, crawled back down here, went back down the hallway, the one we just walked up. Actually, I took correction, he went straight back through here into the cloister up here. You can see if I can pan up. Went into the cloister and went back down to cell number 5, which was the time. And then the guardian came in, from Paolino, I believe was his name, Paoluccio, and they prayed that the wounds would be removed, but they weren't. Unlike in Pietrelcina, when Padre Pio received the wounds the first time, in 1910, I believe it was, they prayed that the wounds would go away, and they did. This time they did not. Padre Pio kept these wounds. Surrounding Pio kept these wounds for almost exactly 50 years. He received them on September 20th, and he died on September 1918, died on September 23rd, 1968. So in half a century, half of 2 generations, there's something to be read about that. There's something meaningful, something spiritual about that. So yeah, the wounds are a mystery. Padre Pio used to say that they're I'm trying to cut this up here, sorry about this. He used to say that they're a mystery to himself, but for whatever reason, God chooses certain people to share in his wounds, just like St. Paul says in Galatians. He says, I share what is lacking in your sacrifice, in your crucifixion. Doesn't mean that there's something defective about Christ's cross, but it just means that sometimes God asks certain people to share in a special way, to share in a powerful way in Christ's mission of salvation. And Padre Pio was called to use his wounds, to offer his wounds which stayed open and were painful for his life. And he was called to offer them for the conversion of sinners and also for the healing of the sick, sort of a bifold mission that he offered, his sufferings for these things. And again, when he died, a couple days before while he was dying, the wounds started to heal. The day before, there were scabs, they flaked off, and when he died, the wounds were completely gone, and there was no scarring. So the stigmata is a mystery, but it was part of his mission of suffering and sharing in the crucifixion of Christ, because the Capuchin order, the movement it was born as a Capuchin Franciscan reform movement to share in Christ, to imitate Christ on the cross as much as possible. So some people, like Padre Pio, got that in a very powerful way. So we're walking through the choir. Let me turn this around. The choir in the newer church, it's still St. Mary of Graces. You can't really see much up here. It's dark in here. We're here in the morning, which is better because there's not anybody in here, and I can do this without really bothering anybody. And we're going to go outside. We're going to go back outside, and we'll see what's open, what we can go to next, okay? So I'm here at the sanctuary of Padre Pio, and in just a few moments we'll go down into the sanctuary and I'll conclude there. But before we conclude, I do want to just share 3 short, let's call them short stories of my personal experiences and personal testimonies with Padre Pio. Because when I first heard of Padre Pio, heard his story, I saw these people, I saw statues everywhere, this enthusiasm that borderlined on fanaticism. I thought it was over the top, and that's just quite simple. It probably is, but quite simply, the reason is because I had never had a personal experience with Padre Pio. But once he started getting into my life, I am now a fanatic, and I'm now over the top. But I will tell you this, the first experience I had was the early 2000s, 2005 or 6 or 7, somewhere in there. My wife, who's from this region of Italy, she's from Motola in Puglia, about an hour and a half south of here. She was here in Italy, I was in the US, I was working as a pilot, and I was asleep by myself, and I had a dream that Padre Pio walked into the room and he wanted to touch my hand. I was lying on my right side and I held up my left hand, and he said, no, not that hand, the right hand. So I rolled over, held up my right hand, and he touched it. And then he was gone and I was awake. So I say it was a dream, and I say he spoke to me, but he sort of spoke to my heart, kind of almost the eyes of my mind. But I'm not sure if it was a dream, because for a long time, a couple of years, I thought it was a dream. And I even told Katya the next morning, I said, Katya, I had a dream of Padre Pio, wanted to touch my hand, but not my left hand, my right hand. She said, oh, that's interesting. And then we talked about something else. It wasn't really that striking, but it stayed with me, and I remembered it. And then I was in Loreto, where I live now, and I was at confession to the Capuchin friars who staff the sanctuary up there. There's an old Capuchin friar. This was probably 15 years ago. And he had a long white beard, and I did my confession. At the end of it, I said, there's something happened a few years ago I wanted to tell you about. And I told him about the dream, and he just kind of nodded, and I finished, and he said, well, it happens all the time. I was like, oh, really? I thought it was kind of weird. He said, no, Padre Pio appears to people all the time in dreams. And he said that's very common, and he said he also appears to people through the fragrance of perfume, of the scent of roses. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And I said, what about the right hand? Does it mean anything? It was, well, yeah. He says, that's the right hand. That's the predominant hand. It's the hand we do things with. He said, Padre Pio was like that. He was very simple. He used signs. He wanted a hand from you. So here I am 15 years later, and I'm doing these things for Padre Pio. But anyway, that was the first thing, and I believe it was what's called a nocturnal apparition. It wasn't a dream. It's in nighttime. External angels or saints can visit people externally. It comes from the outside, not the inside. So I don't think it was a dream. I think it was a nocturnal apparition or nocturnal visitation. Second time was with a relic. Father Carlos Martins has a relic ministry called the Treasures of the Church. And he came to our parish in Peachtree City, Georgia, and he said, he gave a talk, and he said for all of us, to go out into the hall where the relics are. And if we have maybe a namesake or a saint that we've heard of before, maybe someone we're interested in or we feel a kinship with, to take that relic and pick it up. So I went to St. Francis, went to St. Clair, because I'm a third order Franciscan, picked up the relic, touched it a little bit. Nothing really strong happened, but I saw the relic of Padre Pio, and I remembered the dream. Picked it up, and as soon as I held it to my chest, just like this, I felt like a jolt of power, of energy. It was something very physical. I moved it away. It was so strong. And I thought, holy cow. And I put it back to my chest again, and I felt the strong power. Third time, it was here about 6 or 7 years ago, and I was up at the ancient church, and it was February. There was hardly anybody there. I was visiting a surviving spiritual son of Padre Pio for Mass. I was there about 30 minutes early. And I went into the old church, the ancient church, and I was praying, and I smelled roses. And I smelled roses very strongly. About 5 minutes after I sat down, I started to get the fragrance, and it was so strong, it was as if somebody was like blowing perfume underneath my nose. And I've heard people say that when you smell spiritual perfume, there's no doubt. It's not like, is that roses or not? It was like strong, and that's how it was. Mass started. I went into Mass, and I met the spiritual son of Padre Pio, Adolfo Affatato. We went to Mass together. Halfway through the Mass, the priest, during the consecration of the Eucharist and the liturgy of the Eucharist, he held up the host, and the moment he held it up, I smelled the roses again, just like flooding under my nose. So strong. That was the third time. And I was here at Padre Pio. So Padre Pio, those three experiences I had with him, they kind of confirmed that he is sort of my spiritual, saintly intercessor, spiritual father, from a saintly spiritual father, if you will. But he gets into a lot of people's lives like this. And it's said that when he gets into one person's life, he gets into their family's life. And as a matter of fact, my mother died at 2 o'clock in the morning on September 23rd. And she was sick. I was praying for her. I was praying to Padre Pio. I said, look, please intercede, do something. And a couple days later, on his feast day, she died at 2 o'clock in the morning. On his feast day. So that's my experience with Padre Pio. He used to say that when he was alive, he would tell his spiritual sons and daughters, he would say, I'm going to make more noise after my death than when I'm alive. He would tell his spiritual sons and daughters who were afraid after he would leave, when he was deceased, what they would do. And he said, when I'm not here anymore, go into a chapel, go find the Eucharist, pray in front of the tabernacle, and where you find Jesus, there you will find me. Very strong stuff, very powerful stuff. So that's it. I'm going to go down into the crypt now, and I'm going to let this run as I walk down into the crypt and just show you Padre Pio's tomb, and then we'll conclude there. So if you like my videos, if you like what I'm doing, please hit a like, hit subscribe. I don't monetize this channel. I want to keep it that way. So if you want to support me, go to my books, Amazon.com. You can get all my books. Just put Bret Thoman and they'll all pop up. I've got 7 books on Padre Pio, some of his spiritual daughters and spiritual sons' diaries that I've translated. So thank you again for following the chapel, and I'm just going to go down into the tomb now, and we're going to conclude there. Through the door,